Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. Today, that is this evening, I'm going to be reading from a particular book. I think this book is important for Americans to understand. My audience will probably be Americans if they're willing to see the truth. This is a book I bought in 2014. I've shared some of this book in the past, but not all of it. This is a book that cost me roughly, I think, $35 to $40 a piece. This is one of them. The other book is to deal with what I would call, if I can find it here, maybe it's not here. Um, let's see if I can find it here. Here it is. The New History of America. Both these books are what I would call from the Informer. And let me be very clear to you on this subject matter. The Informer was one who actually practiced this. So he's not a fake. He's not what we call a paid operative, which is what most people are today. They are paid operatives, especially those who write books for the New York Times bestsellers. Um, when they have money and the best production, whatever you want to call it. Same thing with people like Alex Jones. People like, what's the guy over in Britain? I can't think of his name, but it'll come to me. These are paid operatives. They're shills. That's what they are. I'm not saying you can't get any truth from these guys, but you better be very discerning in what they're sharing because most of the time they are promoting fear porn. So this is it's called The Myth and the Reality, Just Who Owns the United States. And this is strictly for those, you can listen to it if you're British or whatever, but this is just to give you an idea at first how this country was never free. So here we go. Chapter 1. This is not a book. This is not a book full of conspiracy theories. It is simply put a book of historical facts that have been selected in context that will defy any attempt to dismiss it with the disparaging use of the term conspiracy theory. It is a fact conspiracy minus theory. So the 1828 Webster Dictionary defines conspiracy as a combination of men for an evil purpose, an agreement between two or more people or persons to commit some crime in concert and a plot. Theory is defined in the same dictionary as mere speculation. The facts will show that there is indeed a conspiracy. That is, most definitely show that there is indeed, definitely not a wild eye theory from the foaming mouths of a lunatic. The appeal of this book is to reasoning faculties of those that read it by furnishing the facts as faltered for better understanding the current state of affairs in this country. Quote, this is from Thomas Paine, The Rights of Man. Reason and ignorance, the opposite, influence the great bulk of mankind. If either of these can be rendered sufficiently extension in the country, the machinery of the government goes easily on. Reason obeys itself, and ignorance submits to whatever it dictates to it. Again, that's from The Rights of Man by Thomas Paine. Ignorance is a state of not knowing. When reason is present, but the knowledge is lacking, the term frequently refers to nothing other than the lack of knowledge. This lack of knowledge can be corrected. It is the willfully ignorant mind, one that purposely closes his mind and accepting of knowledge that undermines his views of the world, that will have a very difficult time accepting the simple facts presented in this particular book. Such resistance to the truth has resulted in the intentional spreading of the term conspiracy theory. In fact, the word was never in term thinking until probably in the 1970s with Gary Allen's book talking about conspiracy. That was it was a decent sized selling book dealing with America. Such resistance to the truth has resulted in the intentional spreading of the term conspiracy theory to include many sets of facts that undermine the current political and social infrastructure. Propaganda's most evil goal is to promote slogans and their accompanying ideas to the points where faith and belongings are more important than facts and principle arguments. Bringing down these fortified castles built upon the sands of contradictory and factual unsupported belief systems is the goal of this book. The sapper implement of this endeavor is the one tool that frightens those in power the most, the truth. If you were taught Santa existed after, say, 5 years old, and this continued till you were at death's bed, you would not believe someone that said Santa did not exist. This is what's happened to American people concerning their government and the way we live today. There happens to be a mind process called cognitive dissonance. This is where someone tells you a truth and contradicts a lie taught all your life, like the Santa Claus lie mentioned above, that the mind rejects the truth. This is called a core belief that everyone has. It is this core belief that has to be eliminated in order to accept the truth. Here is an example of what I mean. I believed Santa until I was 7 years old because my mom and dad would not lie to me, would they? I refused to believe my playmates that were told the truth at maybe 5. No, can't be, said I. Believe the ones I trust telling me Santa was coming tonight and set up a tree and bring presents. Oh, I like presents, so it had to be the truth. Extrapolated that over to what government promises you today. So when finally mom and dad told me the truth, I had a hard time accepting that there was no Santa Claus. It would not leave me for another 2 years. I just had that hope they were not lying. This is why I opened with what I did about ignorance and your mindset that you can't help but to believe a lie taught all your life. This book probably will be the last I will write to prove your Santa does not exist the way he was taught you by your people you trust. So let's start to try to eliminate that cognitive dissonance. In case you are wondering what is it, read this. The TCD theory of cognitive dissonance by Leon Festinian of Stanford University Press, 1957, holds that the mind involuntarily rejects information not in line with previous thoughts or actions, he observed. A person can deal with the pressure generated by changing the distance of the old behavior to harmonize with, back to this page here, with information. But if the person is committed to the old behavior and way of thinking, he simply rejects the new information. And that's what's happening today with what has occurred in 2020 and is continuing this year. Okay? As simply, I don't believe it. Thought or word is the easy cop-out. For if you are unaware, you are unaware of being unaware. To make you aware of whom the players are in this expose, the myths and frauds upon the Americans are these 3 entities that rule the world today. We start with the Pope. This man of mortal failings, like all of us have, called himself the Vicar of Christ. No one else but the original Pope called himself this and created a church called the Catholic Church. Catholic means universal. That's all it means. This mere mortal then set up a group of like-minded people as the Vatican. It became a corporation, a government, if you will, of the church. Webster, in his 1828 dictionary, called the Pope a sham, as no one was ever given that character by the Lord. He is completely correct. These people are playing games, and they're fooling the people who are completely mesmerized by that. He was a man that could read and took it upon himself to declare vicar's status so he could rule over men under the guise of the church. From this universal church, you have people that call themselves Protestants, Baptists, Mormons, and etc., because they had disagreements with the Pope. In the history of the popes, it was the Pope that caused the first income tax to be laid on the people of the Vatican, so that the Pope was the first man to lay an income tax on people. This is a 2,000-year-old thing here, folks. Not quite close to it. This is where the first income tax on Americans came from, as those in power mimicked the Pope's tax. Popes, either white or black, and that's not race, were not who they professed to be, as many were sadists, and did many deviant things that the Lord said man should not do, like when the Pope used the Jewish people to apply usury to their money dealings, and after the people did that, the popes had them killed. This is a well-documented book. This is well documented by Emanuel Josephson in his books that I refer in my book. Now, let me say Emanuel Josephson. If you know who this guy is, you search him. And his name is Emmanuel Josephson, and he was a doctor, a practicing doctor, and he wrote a few books. I think there are 5 or 6 of them. One, he dealt with Rockefeller. He also dealt with Rockefeller and the gold. I think one was to deal with Rockefeller and the medicine and his men. And there's one also dealing with the whatever happened to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, which is an interesting book. I've read that one. So let's get back into this. So popes are human and fail like we all do, and they do not deserve the title of the Vicar of Christ. Next, we have the kings of the nations of the world. They all claim they have the divine rights over men. Really? No, they don't. Meaning that God has given them the right to command people what to do, sort of a mini pope who has control of all churches. But in this book, we're talking about the King of England. Sometimes this reign of kings and queens were called the crown. In 1600, King James took the Geneva Bible and created his own version called the King James Version. In doing so, he took all the side notes out of the Geneva Bible that explained the passage. And I don't agree with that passage because Geneva Bible is a Bible that did have this notes. It's the first book, it's the first Bible ever to have notes in it. And I know that John Calvin was involved in it, and I'm pretty sure that John Knox was involved in it. And there were others. Okay, so this is a Geneva Bible. But anyway, going to the time, people could not read. And the king did this to cover the fact he was a known homosexual and other deeds that he didn't want the subjects of his known. Now let us tie these two together back in 1213, so you see how they affect America and you today. This is the key deal at this point for us. The king was excommunicated from the church prior to 1213 for reasons I will not go into. Well, I'll tell you why. He refused the archbishop. He told the pope that he wasn't going to accept him, and that got him in a lot of hot water. Excommunication means that your soul cannot go to heaven when you die, or that's the story the pope has had to command. They follow Vatican or church rules. So the pope played it for all its worth and told the king that the pope would install the king in good stead and his soul would go to heaven. But the catch was that the king had to give up his worldly possessions and all his subjects, that is his people, to the pope in 1213. The king agreed and then became a vassal of the pope forever, and the king's British Empire was totally owned by the pope. So he sold out. Anything denoted as a British Empire anywhere in the world was now owned by the Pope, but the king could still pretend to rule the British Empire. So it's an acting job here, you see. Next, we have the crown. The other crown, which I will call, is the crown bank throughout the book. They consisted of the international bankers of the time, and they can be found partially listed at the end of this book. The King Exchequer, his bank that was in London was part and partially handed over to the Pope in 1213. Much like today in a takeover of one bank by another bank. Remember, as this is very important in understanding the book, the Pope and the King still battle each other. The Pope's in a way controlled by the King. Look at it this way. The King was a tenant on his property that once was his, but the Pope could not run everything as the King could, so he sat back in Rome and pulled the strings. Sort of like, General Motors. General Motors owns how many companies, cars? Well, they own Chevrolet, Pontiac, Buick, Cadillac, etc. When the king refused to accept Stephen Langdor, this is what I was talking about, as the Archbishop of Canterbury by Pope Innocent, Pope Innocent III in 1208, that is what caused the king to be excommunicated. Whether he realized it or not, he tried to deny his agreement with the Pope in 1213. But the bankers, the Crown Bank, fronted the money to both the Pope and the King. So now we have both parties owing to the Crown bankers their debt. Pope Innocent, the White Pope, rejected the Magna Carta in his papal bulls. From Josephson, that is Emmanuel, book, I quote, the Pope incited strife by using what few teachings of Christ he follows, such as Saints Levy's allies, alias Matthew, as Mark 2:14, Luke 5:27, cited Jesus as father as Matthew 10:34 and 36, and Luke 12:49 and 51 through 53. No, nothing more clearly revealed the antithesis of government and religion than these facts. Are you still with me as the bankers are still sitting back taking this all in? That's why I injected in here. The Crown could care less about their squabblers. Both owned the Crown Bank money and, like the banks of today, could foreclose on them anytime they wanted. Sound familiar? As to what is happening today, did the common man have anything to say in those days as to what government was doing to him? Keep this in mind as to who the players are as you read the book. Do not get confused as to what crown I am referring to. Do not rely on history books to explain the two crowns. Remember, Columbus was Italian and came from Italy. Where is the Pope located? You guessed it. Who fronted the money for his voyage? The Queen of Spain. But this is history you're taught, you see. The real facts are the Italian explorer Giovanni Cabot, who sailed for England's King Henry VII, and became known by his anglicized name as John Cabot. Cabot arrived in 1497 and claimed North America for the English sovereign while Columbus was still searching for India and the Caribbean. As you see, the English sovereigns referred to the King of England. They have already gave his total empire to the Pope. In other words, both king and pope owe their soul to the crown bankers. So who owns what you call the United States? Who really fronted the money to find America? Yeah. This book will show you that all three own the United States and how they did it, that you will never find printed in any standard history book. Remember that over the centuries, the only one of these three that changes is the international bankers. They just have different names. You know, they were one time called the Old Frugers, Knights Templars, Geisers, Tuscans, and others. You had the Federal Reserve of the Exchequer, the Bank of England. You have the IMF, the World Bank, etc., all now owned and controlled by the Black Pope of Vatican. All right, here we go. Chapter 2. Let's see if we can get to this or not. I'm just trying to think. Yeah, we'll try to do chapter 2. Okay. All right. The constitutional requirements for president are no person except a natural-born citizen. Here's some red flags for you to see, folks. Or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of this Constitution shall be eligible to the office of president. Neither shall any person be eligible for that office who shall have not attained the age of 35 years old and has been been 14 years a resident within the United States. The constitutional requirement for Congress are no person shall be represented who shall not have attained to the age of 25 years old and been 7 years a citizen of the United States, and who shall not, when elected, be inhabitant of that state in which he shall be chosen. Shall be an inhabitant of that state. The constitutional requirement for a senator are no person shall be a senator who shall not have attained the age of 30 years old and been 9 years a citizen of the United States, and who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of that state for which he shall be chosen. All right. Historical fact. The United States never existed before the year 1783. Okay. Reason being that from the CIA document Gov website, it states when the United States was officially recognized. Britain's America colonies broke with mother country in 1776 and were recognized as a new nation, the United States of America, following the Treaty of Paris in 1783. The Constitution was adopted in 1787, only by those few that drafted it, you see. Which I'm in agreement with simply is that, and this is my point, we didn't sign it. We don't have to partake in it, period. It's not our contract, period. Lysander Spooner makes that very clear. It was never put to the people to ratify or adopt, yet because the Crown and Pope dictate the parameters to the Founding Fathers so they could still control their property that never was given up in the Revolutionary War. Read the 1783 Treaty of Peace, wherein the front man for the Crown, the King, actually dictated the terms of peace. That's right, you heard it. So, did we win the war? You must ask yourself, did we win the war? Now, he doesn't ask that question, but I'm asking that question. Did we really win the war? Well, the Treaty of this particular Paris terms, it seems as though we didn't win the war at all. The people sent to sign it from America did not dictate anything, and their words nowhere appear on the terms writers. The most holy trinity was the big three: the Pope, the King, the Crown bankers, because the Pope owned them all. Here's the membership of the very first Congress convened under the Constitution. Remember, all were British subjects, born on British soil, of parents that were British subjects. And here they are. President of the Senate was John Adams. President pro tempore was John Langdon. Speaker of the House was Frederick Muhlenberg. There were 22 to 26 senators and 59 to 64 representatives, non-voting members. So we go on. The above would mean that the first president to meet the requirements written in the Constitution could not hold office. If he was a natural-born citizen of the United States and lived in the United States for 14 years prior to the adoption of the Constitution as stated above, there was no United States created until 1783. That means having lived in the United States in 17 would mean no man could hold office until 14 years later in 1797. And he could not be born a British soldier or a Chinese soldier or a French subject. Looking at the list of presidents, it is perfectly clear that no president could meet this requirement, as they all were born British subjects from parents that were British subjects. The government propaganda said Martin Van Buren, the 8th president of the United States, was a U.S. citizen. All the rest from the 1st to the 9th were interlopers who did not meet the requirements written in the Constitution. They had no right whatsoever, according to the supposedly law of the land, to hold that office. Now what's getting interesting is that the first 9, with the exception of the 8, according to their written history books, were all born as British soldiers. We never were told this in school. Never. None of this was taught to us. We're all born as British subjects on British soil. You can see that in the government documents from which I obtained the data. He even listed William Harrison as the last president who was born a British subject. This is a part truth and part lie, as they always obfuscate everything so it fits the lie they tell you. The question is, if they did this, why can't Obama do this? Well, I won't go into a whole lot of this, but anyway, what worth is that fraud called the Constitution? Read that as a con job. Well, didn't George Bush, W, call it a goddamn piece of paper? Yeah, he did. He sure did. I remember that. I'll never forget that, because I remember that very quickly, distinctly. Sure did. Does he know something you don't know? You bet he does. And I agree with him. You can check this out on these particular sites here. I'm not going to go into all that. Of course, everyone is up in arms at his statement. Here's cognitive dissonance fully at work, because people believe the lie of the Constitution fed them all their lives and shows that they have no reason and a closed mind. I am sure you would rail at this statement too. Of course they will. People, they don't get it. See, they hold on to something very tightly. They don't know it. So the other word I've done this the other day. The Constitution simply means the word "con" is in front. That's a red flag too. So if the founding fathers let the Crown Pope dictate what the Constitution would contain, which they did, why are we all bound to believe anything that is in such a charter called a Constitution? I would call it a contract. Well, Sanders Spooner would call it that, I should say. If they don't uphold it, then why should any citizen be required to do so? Such as obtaining a license to merely travel, obtaining a permit to work on your own house, register consumer goods, such as the automobile, pay for Social Security, pay taxes on any kind, or even become subject to their statutes. The only question is, how can anyone be bound by such a monumental fraud, and why haven't the courts brought this out, you might ask? Because if the present day knew, remember, they are from the same ignorant class as other Americans, they would not bring this out because they could not control the subjects now called citizen. Why, you ask? Well, if you ever ask the attorney, and they are judges, what meme and term is, they don't know. I quote this from a phrase dictionary. That which belongs to me and that which is another's. Mem is Latin for what is mine, and tuum is Latin for what is thine. This is about mine and thine. If a man said not to know the difference between mine and time is a polite way of saying he is a thief. They would have to admit that they were told what to write by the crown as if it was not of their doings, and they are a thief for the Pope's corporation. This shows how huge a fraud it is, and that alone would be to null the so-called law of the land. After all, the only bylaws apply to those that wrote the Constitution. But see further the role that attorneys play in this fraud. Hey, let's call it as a con job, a big fraud on the people. I give the defining of fraud in this book. Now, when one reads my books, The Big Lie and The Big Lie 3, you can see why I wrote that way back before finding this out from Big Al's research in 2008. Remember, America is a country. The United States is a place within America. It is not a country. Hear that? The United States is a place within America, and it is not a country. You see, I've already made a mistake on that one. Also, what you were not told were the framers signed the constitutions as witnessing only. In law, this is an impossibility to witness a document no one signed. From Lysander Spooner, this is chapter 3. A well-established lawyer and writer from the 1830s to the 1870s, come this from his Constitution of No Authority book on signing any legal document. The Constitution has no inherent authority or obligation. It has no authority or obligation at all, unless as a contract between man and man, and it does not so much as it ever purported to be a contract between persons now existing. It purports at most to be only a contract between persons living 80 years ago. Now, that's his time period now, not now. That's his time period, Lysander, okay? And it can be supposed to have been a contract then only between persons who have already come to years of discretion so as to be competent to make reasonable and obligatory contracts. Furthermore, we know historically that only a small portion, even of the people then existing, was consulting on the subject or asked or permitted to express either their consent or dissent in any formal manner. These persons, if any who did give their consent formally, are all dead now. Most of them have been dead 40, 50, 60, or 70 years. And the Constitution, so far as it was their contract, died with them. They had no natural power or right to make obituary upon their children. It is not only plainly impossible in the nature of things that they could bind their posterity, but they did not even attempt to bind them. That is to say, the instrument does not propose to be an agreement between anybody but the people then existing, nor does it either expressly or impliedly assert any right, power, or disposition on their part to bind anybody but themselves. The Constitution not only binds nobody now, but it never did bind anybody. This is all Lysander Spooner here. Brilliant man. It never bound anybody because it was never agreed to by anybody in such a manner as to make it. No, because it was never even, people were not even allowed to vote on it. They never even voted on it. So it's even a bigger con. Because it was never agreed to by anybody in such a manner as to make it, or in general principles of law and reason binding upon him. In a general principle of law and reason that a written instrument binds no one until he has signed it. This principle is so inflexible, a one that even thought a man is unable to write his name, he must still make his mark. before he is bound by a written contract. This custom was established ages ago, I should say, when few men could write their names. When a clerk, that is, a man who could write, was so rare and valuable a person that even if he was guilty of high crimes, he was entitled to pardon. There was very people who even could write back then. Even at that time, a written contract must be signed, and men who could not write either make their mark or sign their contract by stamping their seal upon wax, affixing it to the parchment on which their contracts were written. Hence the custom of affixing seals that has continued to this time. The laws hold, and reason declares that if a written instrument is not signed, the presumption must be that the party to be bound by it did not choose to sign it or to bind himself by it. This is why I shared something about how important your signature is. Okay, and you need to begin to guard that. Okay, and law and reason both give him until the last moment in which to decide whether he will sign it or not. Neither law nor reason requires or expects a man to agree to an instrument until it is written, or until it is written, he cannot know its precise legal meaning. And when it is written and he has had the opportunity to satisfy himself with its precise legal meaning, he is then expected to decide, and not before, whether he will agree to it or not. And if he does not, then sign it. And if he does not sign, then sign it. His reason is supposed to be that he does not choose to enter into such a contract. That's it. The fact that the instrument was written for him to sign, or with the hope that he would sign, goes for nothing. Where would be the end of fraud and litigation if one party could bring into a court a written instrument without any signature and claim to have it enforced upon the ground that it was written for another man to sign, that this other man had promised to sign it, that he ought to have signed it, that he had the opportunity to sign it if he would, but that he had refused or neglected to do so. Yet that is the most that could ever be said of the Constitution. Come on, folks, wake up. Get off your belief systems here. The very judges who profess to derive all their authority from the Constitution from an instrument that nobody ever signed would spurn any other instrument not signed that should be brought before them for adjudication. Moreover, I'm getting a little tired here, so it's getting after 11 here in the U.S. East Coast. Moreover, a written instrument must, in law and reason, not only be signed, but also be delivered to the party or to someone for him, in whose favor it is made, before it can be bind the party making it. The signing is of no effect unless the instrument be also delivered, and a party is at the perfect liberty to refuse to deliver a written instrument after he has signed it. The Constitution was not only never signed by anybody, but it was never delivered by anybody to anybody, agent, or attorney. It can therefore be of no more validity as a contract than can any instrument that was never signed or delivered. Footnote: every man who drafted it never signed it in any way to bind themselves by it as a contract, and not one of them probably ever would have signed it in any way to bind himself by it as a contract. If then nobody is individually responsible for the acts of Congress, the members of Congress are nobody's agents. And if they are nobody's agents, they are themselves individually responsible for their own acts and for the acts of all whom they employ. And the authority they are exercising is simply their own individual authority. You understand what I'm talking about here, folks? This is serious. Lysander Spooner figured it all out. No one, you see, the Constitution has no validity, period. But everybody is putting their energy into this belief system. The emperor has no clothes, folks. Never has. The president's the same way. Your senators, your House of Representatives, they don't have any power. They're a void. by the law of nature, the highest of all laws. Anybody injured by their acts, anybody who is deprived of them of his property or his liberty, has the same right to hold them individually responsible. That he has to hold any other trespasser individually responsible. He has the same right to resist them and their agents that he has to resist any other trespasser. This is why the education system, which I talked about earlier tonight, the government schools, was so important to brainwash the people within 20 or 30 years after the country started. On general principles of law and reason, the oaths which these pretended agents of the people take to support the Constitution are no validity or obligation. And why? For this, if for no other reason, viz., that they are given to nobody. There is no privity, as the lawyers say. That is, no mutual recognition, no consent, and no agreement between those who take these oaths and any other person. This is how Congress and state legislatures operate today. It is. They're actors. I'm going to have to stop here. I'm going to finish up here, and that'll be it. It's just the third chapter. If I go upon Boston Common in the presence of 100,000 people, men, women, and children with whom I have no contract upon the subject, take an oath that I will enforce upon them, that is the laws of Moses, or Licurgus, of Solon, or Justin, or of Alfred. That oath is on general principle, law, and reason, of no obligation. It is of no obligation, not merely because it is intrinsically a criminal one, but also because it is given to nobody, and consequently pledges my faith to nobody. It's merely given to the winds. That's the end of the quote by Lysander Spooner. I challenge you to read Lysander Spooner's works. They're actually on the website he has here on the internet. Stop being stupid, people. Start becoming responsible. Grow up. You've been hoodwinked. For how many years here? Over 200 years in this country. And a lot of it simply is the government educational system did this for you. They did this to you because simply is they needed to do this. And someday I'll do something on him, the guy who pushed this whole educational system here in America that gave us the Prussian system. So it's about time for me to go to bed. I'm pretty tired. I've done about 4 or 5 videos a night. So, okay, my voice is gone. Again, I'd appreciate feedback. It would be good to hear from others if this helps you. If I come across strong, because I basically see this as that it's not rocket science, folks. It's not. It's not. You choose to be in La La Land, and you will face the responsibilities of that also. So we wish you good night. You take care. Bye-bye.